The HBO series True Detective is about two Louisiana detectives who trace a murder case for 17 years. Matthew McConaughey, you may well know him, is one of the stars. He plays Rust Cole, and his character has a very challenging worldview. He calls the world a giant gutter in outer space. And he believes that we are merely things that labor under the illusion of having a self. He believes that we're programmed to believe that we're special somebodies, but according to his worldview, everybody's nobody. And so he argues that the honorable thing for our species is to deny our programming, stop reproducing, walk hand in hand to extinction, and opt out of this raw deal that we have been given. He has a very bizarre worldview. But we do come to understand a little bit of why this is so. His nihilism stems from the loss of his little daughter years earlier from a drunk driver. And after that experience, he was convinced that life is purposeless and void of any kind of meaning. He's an addict. He abuses drugs in order to keep his workaholism going. His marriage ends and he hallucinates and suffers from insomnia. His worldview just leads to misery and doesn't provide any hope after death. Yet if we look at him closely, what we see is a very tattered man who is really trying to believe in something. And so we can say this man is on a spiritual journey, that he's asking the same questions that we ask when we face the evil that's all around us. And just as he is involved in the eternal struggle like we are, the struggle between light and darkness, the struggle to find truth. So as we come together this weekend, this first Sunday of our Advent season, each one of us is called to be on this spiritual journey also. And as we come together in the midst of the tragedies in Ferguson, Ebola and ISIL, immigration issues with the homeless, inequality, racism. So, do we feel like Rust? That we have been given a raw deal and we maybe should opt out? Is the universe purposeless without meaning? Have we been so scarred by the challenges of life that we find a mirror of ourselves in the character that Matthew McConaughey plays? And is that why that this show has been called the best show ever? Is this why the last episode of the first season, which ended in March, literally broke the internet because so many people tuned in to watch this series? Now, we call ourselves Christians and Catholics, but we have to ask ourselves, how firm is our belief in what this Advent season prepares us to celebrate? That God broke into our world to tell us in a very astonishing way that it isn't a raw deal. That through his suffering Son, our God tells us of his caring for us and gives us meaning and purpose in the midst of all the challenges and evil that we see around us. When the best-selling writer Stephen King was interviewed by NPR's Terry Gross, King shared some interesting thoughts about his faith in God. At one point, Gross commented, she said, "So you always believed in God? You were just bored in church?" Well, King replied, he said, "It's certainly a subject that's interested me, and I think it interests me more the older that I get. And I think we'd all like to believe that after we shuffle off this mortal coil, that there's going to be something on the other side. Because for most of us, I know for me, life is so rich, so colorful and sensual and full of good things, things to read and things to eat and things to watch and places to go and new experiences, that I don't want to think that you just go to darkness. I choose to believe in God. There's no downside to that. If you say, well, okay, I don't believe in God, there's no evidence of God, then you're missing the stars in the sky, and you're missing the sunrises and sunsets, and you're missing the fact that the bees pollinate all these crops and keep us alive, and the way that everything seems to work together. And then he went on to say this. He said, but at the same time, there's a lot of things in life where you say to yourself, well, if this is God's plan, it's very peculiar. And you have to wonder about that guy's personality, the big guy's personality. What I'm saying now is, I choose to believe in God, but I have serious doubts. So where do we find ourselves this Advent of 2014? Are we more like Matthew McConaughey's character or Stephen King? Have we given up totally, or do we struggle with our doubts? Do we struggle with this God who has a very peculiar plan, as Stephen King said, and then choose to surrender to mystery? Choose to not have all the answers. Choose to believe that somehow the light always defeats the darkness. I believe this is the challenge of Advent. To spend some time not being afraid to ask ourselves the tough questions about the reality of our own individual worldview. To face our doubts. To allow the tragedies of our lives to give us a deeper understanding of the mystery of life and God, rather than to send us into despair and nihilism. In that first reading, the Israelites reflected on their wandering, their hardness of hearts, and they had to surrender to the peculiar ways of the God they did not understand. They had to accept being clay in the hand of the potter. They had to rest with not having all the answers. Paul, in the second reading, tells us that our Creator, if we enter into this journey, will keep us firm until the end. And that's why that gospel, this first Sunday of Advent, always confronts us with be alert, stay awake, be watchful. Don't become complacent and fall into the trap that Rust falls into in The True Detective. He loses all hope. Now, as we face Advent this year, we all have to admit that in this very secular age, there is a lot of religious disenchantment. Many people have left institutional religion. James Carroll wrote a rather provocative article in the New York Times on this very subject. He entitled it, Jesus and the Modern Man. And he writes that he has been tempted to also leave behind him his allegiance to Catholicism. But what keeps him in this rather messy church is that when he thinks of leaving, the image of Jesus Christ snaps into foreground focus. He writes that he believes what Pope Francis is all about is this, that Pope Francis is offering a sure glimpse of the truth about the faith. The man on his knees washing the feet of the tired poor is the Son of God. That's the truth about the faith that Francis is putting forth. And this is what Advent's all about. We are preparing ourselves to welcome into our hearts and our lives the man on his knees who cares for the poor. It's not about bricks and mortar. It's not about rules and regulations. It's about a God who entered into our world to show us that he did not give us a raw deal. As Michael Gerson wrote in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago, he wrote about Pope Francis. What he said was, he has a pastoral passion to meet people where they are, to recognize some good, even in their brokenness, and to call them to something better. That something better is not membership in a stable institution or even the comforts of ethical religion. It is a relationship with Jesus from which all follows. All else follows. I believe this is the challenge of this Advent season for us. The question, what's our worldview? Is our worldview centered around a relationship with this Jesus the Christ? So let us, during the Advent season, each of us, take a serious look at our worldview. Are we just a giant gutter in outer space with no meaning or purpose? Is life a raw deal? Or are we struggling believers connected to one another by a God-man who eschewed power, exuded kindness, and pointed to the one whom we call Father? I believe the Advent season is all about finding a deeper relationship with the man on his knees, washing the feet of the tired poor.